Hi, welcome to Philosophy 70 in this section on David Hume. So we talked about Plato, we talked about Descartes. They were rationalists, right? So what they counted as knowledge was what they could know through reason, and experience didn't count. Well, David Hume, a Scottish philosopher born in 1711 and died in 1776, and probably my favorite of the dead white men because I think he gets a lot of stuff right. So David Hume, not a rationalist, he's an empiricist. So what's that mean? That what he counts as knowledge, or the basis of knowledge, has to do with experience. Now, he's not anti-reason, he's just saying that reason is a tool, right? That reason alone can't give us any information. So here's a little example or experiment. So here's a little device. Some of you may know what it is, but a lot of you may not, so I'll describe it. You can turn this thing here and it makes this thing go up and down, and it's got a couple of little guides on it right here. It's made out of metal, and here it is. For those of you who know what it is, or think you know what it is, why do you know what it is? And for those of you who don't know what it is, why don't you? Simple question. Why don't you know what this is? I'm going to tell you. Here, it's called a capo, and it's for guitars. So, you know what it is now? Okay. For those of you who don't, okay, and those of you who do, the reason you do or do not know what this is because of experience or lack of experience. If you've never seen this before, you've never had any experience, you could look at it and you could, decide, well, maybe it's this, or maybe it's that, and you would try and figure out what it was based on how it might relate to something else that you have seen or experienced. And of course, if you have experienced it, you recognize it and you go, oh, I know what that is, because you have prior experience with it. This is really Hume's point, that without experience to give us the initial concept of something, we can't figure it out just through reason. Now, he's willing to say that there are a couple things that we can know through reason, but we'll get to that in a minute. He says, reason is great. I mean, again, he's not anti-rationality. He says, but reason is just a tool. Okay? It needs something to work on. Without there being an experience to put that thing into your mind, that thing for reason to work with, it just sits there and idles. Your reason doesn't do anything. It's just humming along, doing nothing, right? So we need to put some content into the mind for the reason to work on. And we have two things that make up the content of the mind. He says the content of our mind is restricted to perceptions, the things that we experience both outward and our inward experiences. So he's bringing in not only inward sentiments and experiences, but feelings. And he's one of the first philosophers to really count feelings as something important. And of course, we realize now that he was very right about feelings. Anyway, the content of the mind is restricted to these inward and these outward perceptions. And we have two things, two categories you could call them, two things that make up the content of the mind: impressions and ideas. Impressions are our first lively and vivid perceptions, our first experience with things. So, for example, I pick up this and I drink my tea, and I can taste it, and I can feel that it's cold. In fact, it's bothering a little tooth back here because it's very cold, and I have a very lively and vivid perception of it. That impression gets stored immediately as an idea. So he uses the word idea here as a little bit different than what we use in our modern language. Ideas in our modern language are things that we think of. Ideas for Hume are essentially the copies of impressions. So I can think of or remember, I can have an idea of drinking tea, and I can remember what it was like, what it tasted like, that it was cold, that kind of thing. I can even remember that it hurt my tooth, but um, I don't experience it quite as lively, quite as vivid or forceful as that impression. Okay? So I have an impression first, and then I have an idea. Ideas come from impressions. Impressions are your original experience. You can have new impressions that come from ideas being manipulated inside your mind. So that's, I think, a very interesting thing. You can take your ideas, right? You've got all these ideas, which are copies of impressions, and you can combine them. You can reverse the order, transpose them, add to them, take away from them, and you can come up with new impressions, which then also get stored as an idea. Um, Hume uses the example of a gold mountain. You've never seen a mountain made of gold. You've never experienced it. But you have experienced and know about mountains, and you have experienced and know about gold. And in your mind, you took those two ideas and combined them, and now you have a new impression, which leaves a new idea of a gold mountain. We can do that with all sorts of things. Actually, we do that with all sorts of things. All of these things that we consider to be imagination and creativity and so forth is our mind working on the impressions and the ideas, or the ideas really, and we create new impressions, and it can be an endless stream. I have not experienced a gold mountain, but I have that impression that I've created out of ideas, and now I have an idea of a gold mountain, and I combine that with an idea I have of something talking, and now I have an impression and therefore an idea of a um, gold mountain that talks. So you can have almost an infinite combination or manipulation of your ideas. The way that we know that they are ideas rather than new impressions is that the new impressions are more vivid, they're stronger, they have they have more oomph to them than the actual ideas. I mean, if you think about it, so think about this. Here's an experience. So you get up in the middle of the night. It's cold. You're walking to the bathroom and you clip your little toe on the edge of the doorway and it hurts like hell. And what do? Well, you grab your foot, you hop up and down, and you probably swear a lot, and it hurts. That's the impression. But later on, when you think about it, you have the idea that you're thinking about. You're remembering the impression in its stored form of the idea, and it's not as vivid. When you remember it, when you recall that idea, you don't grab your foot and stop and stomp up and down and scream and yell again, because it is not as forceful. Okay, we have impressions and we have ideas. Good. That's the content of the mind. But the content of the mind is operated upon by the understanding. The understanding is the term that Hume uses for reason. In other words, we take our ideas and we work on it uh, with with reason or rationality, and we have two categories of that. We have relations of ideas, and we have matters of fact. So the relations of ideas is essentially um, a priori knowledge. What does a priori mean? Knowledge through reason or before experience. Okay, so a priori knowledge. It's just an operation of thought. It's the way our mind is working, and it doesn't require the existence of an actual thing. For example, I can think of the number 9,742,000 without ever having experienced 9,742,000 of the thing. I just have a concept that I have essentially created, or an idea that has been created through the impressions that I've had and the ideas that I've had of quantity and addition and so on, and I can keep adding. So I don't have to experience the actual thing. I can come up with it through the manipulation of my ideas. So I have relations of ideas. Okay? These are fairly self-evident things. I can look at my different ideas and say, well, this idea of a dog is different than my idea of a sweater, right? I can tell that those are different things. And so that's one type of understanding that I have. The other, and probably the bigger focus of our understanding, is the matters of fact. These are a posteriori knowledge, so it is knowledge that comes through experience, and it is an effect of an experience. So matters of fact are our knowledge, is our knowledge that comes through experience and is an effect of having an experience, right? I drink my tea and I have an experience of it being cold and tasty. So I have that experience and it is caused by something. And this is an area here that becomes really important. It's the idea of cause and effect. We will visit it, we already have, but we will visit it several times throughout the course. But in matters of fact, all of my knowledge that is based on a causal experience. In other words, my seeing this or experiencing that or tasting something else, right? All of that is founded on the relation of cause and effect, and he says it can never produce genuine knowledge. And that's a problem, right? I can't be sure that I'm experiencing what I think I'm experiencing. I have um, I have different effects happen repeatedly, but can I know or be sure of the cause? Hume says no. We cannot know the cause just by looking at the effect or just understanding the effect or experiencing the effect. So that makes him a skeptic. So he has doubts. In the field of epistemology, one of the things that all the philosophers are looking for is certainty. Can I be certain there's a world outside of me? Can I be certain of my own existence? Can I be certain of God? So Hume is telling us, no, there's no certainty. He would allow Descartes' proof of God and saying, well, that is definitely hard to um, escape. I'm sorry, not proof of God, big faux pas on my part, proof of self. He would say that it is very difficult to argue with the second meditation, proof of self. But as far as everything else goes, he says, no, it doesn't work. Um, so he's skeptic. I have no actual impression of causality. In other words, he says, look, I have to have an impression to cause my idea, but I don't and cannot have an impression of one thing causing another. We might see a sequence of events happen repeatedly, but we cannot actually see the cause of one thing causing or creating the effect in another thing. This is something that's sometimes difficult to get a grip on because we see these things happen. We're like, okay, I know, I picked up a marker and I marked on the board, and every time I pick up a marker and touch it to the board, it leaves marks. So I know that the marker caused the marks, and I caused the marker to make those marks. Hume is saying you actually don't know that. You see the sequence of events, but you can't actually see that transference of energy or ink or whatever. You can't experience that. So you see an experience, a sequence of an experience. You see me pick up the pen, take the cap off, hold it up to the board, touch the board and make some movements, and when I take the pen away, there is a mark or marks on the board. And you go, well, yeah, I see that. Just because you see it, which is a sensory perception, doesn't mean it's actually there. Doesn't mean it actually happened. But even if we assume that, okay, it actually did happen, we cannot have an impression of the pen marking, making the marks, and causing all of that. We just see this sequence of events. A follows B, follows C, or leads to C, all of that. And when we see that, we form a habit, so it's on us. We form a habit of believing that one thing has caused another. Okay. So here's a little summation of that, even though I'm going to keep talking about it. Nice little quote. After repeated experiences with a sequence of events, we form a habit of believing that one thing caused another. So that repeated experience reinforces in us that, well, if A happened, B must happen. Right? These things have to happen. There's a cause, and it's actually only us, our inference through habit, that one thing has caused another. If I were to pick something up, okay, and then let go of it and drop it, okay, who's going to be sure that that's going to happen, you or a child? Well, if I let go of it and drop it, you're going to be pretty certain that that's what's going to happen. On the other hand, if I were to let go of it and instead of dropping it floated in the air, who would be more impressed? You or a 2-year-old? 2-year-old wouldn't be so impressed because the 2-year-old is constantly experiencing new things, constantly experiencing changes. Right? They don't have that habit of believing that one thing must cause the other thing, right? There's endless possibilities. So you would be more surprised if the thing I let go of floated in the air, because you have formed a habit of believing that anything that is heavier than air, if you don't suspend it or don't hold it, it will fall to the ground. So you have a strong set of ideas that these things are caused by other things. They are a series of events which happen repeatedly. He uses the term constantly conjoined. In other words, they always happen together. And so you form this habit of believing. However, there are other outcomes. Okay? So he uses an example of a pool ball. And he says, look, you have a ball over here, and then you have a ball over here. If you've never played billiards or pool or seen anything bounce off of anything, he says, you wouldn't know what's going to happen. What you do if you hit, let's say, this ball over here and it rolls over and hits this ball over here, any number of things could happen. You don't know, right? Because you have not experienced it. And your reason would accept all sorts of different outcomes. So this is why he's saying rationalism doesn't really tell us anything either. So a ball could come along, bump into the other one, and then the one that it bumps into could just go off straight. It might sit still and do nothing, and then this ball might bounce back off, or it might, hit it and go off this direction or that direction, might even jump in the air. Any number of things could happen. All of those things are acceptable to our rationality. Only through experience do we understand what happens when one ball hits another. That's why practice makes sense, or practice works. You learn that if you hit this ball with this other ball down here on the side, that it will go off that direction. If you hit it straight on, it will go straight. Through repeated experiences, you learn all of the different possibilities of how hard to hit the ball, where to hit it to make it go where you want, those kind of things. You practice it. In other words, you experience it over and over and over. And all of that is in your mind now that I want that ball to go a certain direction. I have to hit it in a certain place with a certain amount of force. That's only known through experience. Reason could not figure that out without having had some basic impression or experience of one thing hitting another and something happening. So you can't prove cause. You can only say it's happened this way every time I've tried to do it. I've hit that ball a million times, and every time I hit it in this one spot with a certain force, it goes that way. Okay? Okay, I can predict that because of my experiences, but I can't actually experience one ball causing the other one to move. I do not have an impression of that. No matter how closely I get up on, look at the balls hitting each other, or look at the pen marking on the board, and I try and look at it really close. I can't experience it. It just is a bunch of little slices, you could say, that I see. I see the pen moving towards the board, the pen touching the board. I see the marks. I see one ball moving towards the other ball. I experience all of that, and I experience it as a sequence of events, but I cannot say one thing has caused another. So we have no real ability to know what caused anything. Right? We just know that, well, there, there are things that happen, and every time they happen, this other thing has happened before it. But that doesn't mean that it always will. We don't know for certain that the sun will always rise. We just know that so far it always has. So our feeling of certainty, which everybody wants, right, from epistemology, comes from our habit or our custom. He uses the term custom. It's conditioning. Right? We have seen it happen. We expect it to happen. We expect the future to resemble the past. So I reach for a light switch and I flip the switch and I expect the light to come on because in my experience, every time I've done that, it comes on. But when I flip the switch and the light does not come on, then I recognize that there is an interruption in my sequence of events that I'm used to, and I start looking for ways to restore that sequence, right? I want to flip the switch and have the light come on. So what do we do when we flip a light switch and the light doesn't come on? Usually what we do is we have flipped the switch and we flip it again. In fact, we will take the switch and we'll flip it a whole bunch of times, hoping that, the light's going to come on, right? That is a habit we have formed because in the past, when the light has not come on, maybe we haven't flipped the switch, and flipping the switch does make the light come on. But when it doesn't, we start looking for other reasons, other experiences that have gone different than our expected experience. We have, for example, maybe we look to see if the lamp is plugged in, or if the bulb is good. That's one of the things we check, right? Flip the switch, light doesn't come on, let's check the light bulb. So we take the light bulb out and we put in a new light bulb and we flip the switch, and if it doesn't come on, we still flip it a few times. We're like, okay, so it's not the light bulb. And then maybe we go find a light bulb someplace else that we know works, right? We take it out of this other lamp over here that works and we put it in the lamp, and and then we try it again. And if it comes on, great. Right? If it doesn't, we flip the switch a bunch of times and then we start looking for something else. Okay, it's not the bulb. Let's leave that good bulb in there and see what we can find. And of course, hopefully we have checked to see if it's plugged in, but only after we've investigated many different sources. Right? Do we do something more extreme, like, call the electrician and have the whole house rewired, right? Generally, we can find a blown fuse or, some such thing that restores the sequence into the way we want it to happen. We want to flip the switch and we want the light to come on. So it's a sequence of events that we have a habit of expecting it to be that way. Again, we expect the future to resemble the past. We find this useful in a lot of ways, and one is our ability to predict things. I learned that when I put my finger in the fire, I will get burned, and I don't have to do that every time I'm near a fire to see what happened, right? I learned that. And when an experience is a profound one, a very strong one, right? I usually don't have to learn it several times, right? So I burned my finger in the fire, and I don't have to repeat that. It's like that was a powerful experience, and I can say, all right, fire burns my finger. There's a restaurant I like to go to that has really good chips and salsa, but the salsa's a little bit spicier than I can handle. However, every time I go, I try the salsa. I get a chip and I dip it in and take it. I take a bite and then I'm like, oh man, that's too hot. I can't handle it. I can't. Every time. Why? Because that experience is not so vivid. It's not so powerful that I just need that one experience. I might need multiple experiences, and in this case, with the salsa, I've had multiple experiences, and now I'm kind of like, well, no, I'll just leave the salsa alone, or I ask them for something milder because I know that the salsa they make is too hot. So the repetition of our experiences create habits with us, create beliefs, create customs. It's a type of conditioning that makes us think things are caused, like I believe that salsa causes my mouth to burn. It might not be that. It might be something else. I can't actually experience the salsa making my mouth burn. I have the salsa and my mouth burns. I've created the custom of thinking that one is caused by the other. So when we wrap up Hume, we've got some major ideas. He's an empiricist, right? Experience is the basis of knowledge, but he's also a skeptic because experience cannot give us any certainty. We can always be mistaken. We have a feeling of being certain, but that's purely because we have had multiple experiences. We have formed a habit of believing that one thing causes another. So reason cannot give us certain knowledge either, because reason would accept a lot of possible different outcomes. Reason um, can only work on the experience. So experience can't give us certain knowledge. Reason can't give us certain knowledge. We don't have knowledge of cause and effect. And um, it just all winds up to he is a skeptic, and I think rightfully so, because there is no certainty when it comes to knowledge. When it comes to epistemology, we cannot, he says, and I agree with him, be certain of anything. We have very little, if anything, perhaps Descartes' proof of self, that can show us something certain. Um, I think that's all I need for Hume. We will move on to Immanuel Kant, and that will be the next video.